Alrighty then. Hello and welcome to question and answer number 198. I am your host, Pannobhasa. This is my designated primary beverage. The emergency backup beverage is also here, so no worries on that score. And this is my first video with the new chemical operator goatee, because I have to be able to wear a respirator which seals around like somewhere like this, and so it's all got to be like inside. It's kind of scruffy right now because as of the time I'm recording this, it's a Sunday, and so I'm gonna have to shave before I go to work on Monday. Although we're still going through stuff that doesn't require a respirator, so it's just a formality. And I do not know if the audio is going to be coming out like good enough, well enough for this, because for some reason it's like some step in the software, like the audio and video processing software, is apparently gone belly up. So if it still sounds bad, I tried to do like a brief sound check, which is sort of a complicated process. It didn't sound all that great, so I may have to just like re-upload everything because something apparently has stopped working. And I have considered that it's sort of a karmic thing. I mean, from the Buddhist point of view, anything that you experience is the fruition of karma. And so what is the karma that is causing this continual technical complications in me trying to do videos? You know, it's always something. So it's just like I'm revealing secrets of the Matrix or something, and the Matrix is like pushing back by causing these complications or something. Anyways, 198 is not a prime number, of course. In fact, it is 2 times 3 times 3 times 11. Kind of an interesting combination there. And it is possible I will do a live stream for question and answer number 200. It's possible. Although I probably will just do it without announcing it. Maybe on the Discord server. And so you're going to have to be on your toes for that one. So without any further ado, I guess there's one more little ado, is I got a sick fish. You guys want to send metta to my fish, go right ahead. He's a pygmy sparkling gourami, and all the other fish are doing fine. Just for some reason, he's going through some kind of syndrome or something. So, I mean, he's tough. He's been kind of feeling sick for like 3 days, which is unusual for an aquarium fish. Usually an aquarium fish starts looking sick and they just go downhill. They just don't get better. I guess being warm-blooded has the advantage of having a more stable immune system that is functional at, just all the time, because it's got like this narrow temperature range at which it has to function. Like cold-blooded animals like fish, they have to have very flexible enzymes that will, it works at a broad temperature range, or else they just have to have different sets of enzymes that work at different temperature ranges. Whereas we homeotherms, it's just all like locked in to a certain temperature range. Maybe that's the fish's problem. Could be just psychosomatic, I don't know. But any metta you send to my fish would be appreciated. And I guess I should just wade right into this now, after those adieus. And the first question is from Numa. And Numa says, would you ever reordain and try again? And I don't know. I mean, it was like if some sort of catastrophe happened and I was all alone and just, my job and everything just didn't seem like it was worth it. Theoretically, maybe like an option at least would be like reordination as like a novice, what in Burma is called a koyinji, like an adult novice. But yeah, I don't want to become a bhikkhu again in this life. So, I mean, there have been, I've met one or two monks in Burma that just decided to be Koyenjis. There was one who was a relatively well-known Sayadaw, and he was just becoming too famous. And so he voluntarily disrobed down to a novice, a Samanera in Pali, just to kind of lighten the load on all the visitors coming to ask for his blessings and all this kind of stuff. He just wanted to live like in peace and quiet instead of being like the epicenter of like a three-ring circus. So, I mean, an option might be like a Samanera, but I wouldn't want to take full orders again in this life. And chances are I'm not even going to become a Koyenji. So I'm just going to move on to Newman's second question. Samsara equals like being trapped in the hotel photo in The Shining, ? I saw the movie The Shining with Jack Nicholson many years ago, and I don't fully recall the hotel photo, being trapped in the hotel photo. I mean, I remember the movie vaguely, but I do not remember the hotel photo. So I can't really comment on to what extent samsara is like being trapped in the hotel photo. I mean, other movies, as a comparison, it's like Groundhog Day, pretty much. And I'm still unsure if Groundhog Day was a deliberate parable for rebirth or reincarnation, or whether it just kind of turned out that way by coincidence. But Groundhog Day, it's like you have to keep doing it over and over again until you get it perfect. At the very end, Bill Murray, he's like a really nice person who, it's like, he's not selfish anymore. He's like a selfless person. And until he attains that, he keeps having to wake up with Sonny and Cher on the clock radio. It's just never ending. Happens over and over again. You don't know how many thousands of times he had to go through it until finally he becomes just this perfectly selfless being, at least by Hollywood standards. And that's it. Perfection of love and all that. So, yeah, or like the Matrix, kind of. Although technically, even the people who are outside of the Matrix are still, they're still in samsara. Because so long as you have like an individual being and there's like a variety of different things going on, it's still samsara. So, gosh, I guess I answered that one. Man, it's like samsara is like being trapped in any movie, I guess. With nothing outside of the movie, or else just other movies. All there is just various movies, something like that. But even if you get out of the hotel photo or out of the Matrix or out of the movie, if you're still an individual being once you get out, then you're still just in a higher level of samsara. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. After making sure we are recording, yeah, we should have been recording for more than 8 minutes now. That's good. This next question is from Chirzaskaziz. And Chirzaskaziz says, what was the Jain version of the 5 precepts? And I think I already answered that question just 1 or 2 Q&As ago, where the Jain version, it was the same as the Buddhist 5 precepts, although I don't think it was in the exact same order. And the 5th precept was different. In Buddhism, the 5th precept is taking alcohol and any intoxicant which causes you to become like stupid and careless. The Jain version was sort of like a lightened, like a minor version of what the monks and nuns had to do, and it was with regard to personal property. So I don't think that the 5th precept for Jain lay people actually forbade personal property, because it seems like Jains still own personal property in India and elsewhere. So it's probably just like keeping personal property down to a minimum, which maybe could be interpreted very loosely, sort of like gather not up your treasures upon the earth among Christians, which still allows Jain lay people to become very wealthy. I have heard that Jains in India tend to be like wealthy merchants, sort of like Ashkenazi Jews in Central and Eastern Europe back in the day. But with the Jains, they had a reputation for honesty, and so people are more willing to do business with them, and so that's good for business. They make more money. But the fifth precept has something to do with like minimizing personal property in some way, but obviously it doesn't completely forbid personal property because Jains still have personal property. Even monks probably at least have the clothes that they wear. So I guess I answered that question. And so I'm just going to move on to Trizaskas' second question. In Digha Nikaya number 11, in the lesser section on virtue, Buddha speaks about some rules for monks. After listing sort of 10 precepts, he says, he abstains from accepting uncooked grain, raw meat, women and girls, male and female slaves, goats and sheep, fowl and pigs, elephants, cattle, steeds and mares. I mean, why would they say steeds instead of horses? But I digress. Fields and property. And then Trizaskas continues, is this rule of not accepting uncooked grain and raw meat for health issues or something else? Well, it's something else. But before I get to that part, he points out that in Digha Nikaya 11, there is this long list of things that monks don't do. And that's the first 11 suttas in the Digha Nikaya. The first group of suttas in the Digha Nikaya, I think it's the first 11, is called the Sila Khanda, or the section on morality, the section on moral rules, and all of them have this same list. So the first 11 suttas, maybe approximately all 11 suttas, have this long list of things that monks don't do. And there's a lot of overlap with Vinaya, but not entirely. Like in this list of things that monks don't do, there's like a list of games, like the ancient Indian prototype version of chess. Monks don't play these games, but it's not technically against Vinaya, not that I recall. So there's certain things that it's kind of strange. It's like, why would they have this stuff that monks aren't supposed to do, but it's not included in the rules of monastic discipline? It was like maybe they came from two different sources early on, something like that. So anyways, getting to the actual question, is the rule of not accepting uncooked grain and raw meat for health issues or something else? Well, it's not against the rules of monastic discipline for a monk to handle raw meat. There is that strange rule of monastic discipline that says it is against the rules. It's a dukkha offense, a minor offense, for a monk to eat raw meat or drink raw blood unless he is possessed by some kind of demonic entity. Then it's okay. So it's not entirely forbidden for a monk to handle raw meat, because if just to be handling it, there's no prohibition on that according to the rules of monastic discipline. And even eating it is okay if you are possessed by some kind of demonic entity. And I do recall I read the famous text by Dogen long, long ago when I was a college student. I don't remember the name of the text. Dogen being one of the patriarchs of Zen Buddhism in Japan. I think he's considered to be the founder of the Soto Zen sect or some such. And he actually has a story in his book about some Zen monk who had these cravings for raw meat. And then I think it was Dogen himself kind of looks through a crack in the door to see this monk eating the meat. And it wasn't the monk that was eating it, but there was some little demon perched on his head that was eating it. So the raw meat, that may just be sort of like an ancient Indian cultural thing. Like even some kinds of locks It's sort of like pickled herring that's cooked through the acetic acid. It's sort of chemicals cook it instead of heat. That technically there are some strict monks that would, they wouldn't eat like pickled herring, that kind of thing, because technically it's still raw because it hasn't been cooked with heat. So, if you want to pick nits, that's kind of an issue for monks. But getting to the raw, the uncooked grain, that actually is in the rules of monastic discipline. There is a list of things that monks are not allowed to touch, and uncooked grain is on the list. Also, there's weapons, musical instruments, women, even like the personal effects of women, like frilly underpants, that kind of thing, that monks aren't supposed to touch any of that stuff. So the reason why monks are not allowed to touch uncooked grain is partly because monks aren't allowed to cook their own food. They're not allowed to store their own food. So what's the point of storing or even handling uncooked rice, which is mostly what it would have been? If you can't store it, you can't cook it. So I assume that's one, it's to prevent monks from storing food for later, just to make sure that they are completely at the mercy of the universe and at the mercy of the generous lay people who put food into their bowl every morning. So that's the best understanding of it that I have with regard to the uncooked grain. Is just to make sure monks don't start storing food for later and don't start like cooking their own food. And maybe in the Sila Khanda of the Digha Nikaya, that's also why it says monks shouldn't handle raw meat. Because again, somebody's got to cook it. You gotta have to store it at least a little while. So it's probably a similar reason why it's in the Sila Khanda, although they kind of diverge once you get into the actual rules of monastic discipline. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Master Po, and he asked this question that I could not even begin to understand very well. And so he restated the same question, and I still don't understand it. So Master Po, it was with regard to children dying and coming back and having a different kind of near-death experience than adults have, and what is their karmic volition that supposedly makes up the ego. And it's such a weird way of framing the question that I didn't understand it then. I still don't understand it very well. But he asked the question. There is a question mark in here, and I guess maybe a little bit of frustration because there's also an exclamation point right after the question mark. Master Po says, children die and come back, near-death experience, yet do indeed have a very different experience. Where's their karma, in like scare quotes, and volition that make up the I, question mark, exclamation point. So it's almost like he's raising his voice asking this question a second time in different words. And then he says, since there is no self, the I. And I still do not fully understand the karma and volition, although karma technically is the same as volition, that makes up the I. And it's this weird sort of an indirect cause and effect thing where, volition or karma certainly is involved in cooking up the ego. It's not all there is to it because there's also perceptions. You can consider self-view to be largely a matter of perception, with the karma just being like the momentum of these perceptions. So, again, I do not understand how children have a very different near-death experience. It has not been specified, at least not this time. And if it was specified in the previous occasion, then it was some kind of link that wasn't labeled or described or anything, and I didn't click on the link. So I'm still completely in the dark how children have a very different kind of near-death experience from adults. And also, I'm not exactly sure what he's trying to get at with where is their karma that makes up the I. Where is the karma? I mean, karma technically doesn't even have a location. So where is it? I mean, if you consider time and space, especially to be like artifacts of perception, then, I mean, where is just kind of a meaningless question. And I'm not exactly sure what Master Po is thinking, or, what he has in mind when he's referring to karma making the I. So, I mean, even dealing with, like, the karma of some hypothetical child, and their karma, most of their karma doesn't even derive from this lifetime. It's derived from countless lifetimes, including countless times that they were adults. And still there's the momentum of that. The momentum of their adult beliefs, the momentum of their childish beliefs, even a little bit of momentum of like their neonatal or their prenatal beliefs when they're still like an unborn baby. And there's all this momentum of mental states that, I mean, a lot of it is focused around just sort of like the self-identification. Although, like with an animal, they don't really have the same kind of self-reference that humans have. And so, like a toddler would probably be more along the lines of like an intelligent vertebrate, like a non-human mammal than an actual adult. But I mean, in a child, it's going to be all mixed up with all this other momentum from previous existences, which may even include non-human existences. And it's just all this subconscious stuff that you can't really say where it is. It's in the subconscious mind. I mean, you wouldn't even locate it in the brain. In fact, Abhidhamma doesn't even think the brain is involved in thinking. And that's Orthodox Theravada right there. So, I mean, it's just really this vague, weird kind of question that it's very hard for me to wrap my head around it in the manner that it is asked, especially when he doesn't really elaborate on how or why children have a very different near-death experience from adults. But, I mean, your karma isn't just from this life. It goes back, just into the unknown past. So you've got karma from previous existences as an adult. So the karma wouldn't be all that different between a child and an adult. It's adult karma that produces the next child. So where is their karma? I mean, what kind of a question is that? I mean, how do you locate karma? Give it like a latitude, longitude, maybe an elevation above sea level. I just don't get it. Where is their karma? Where is anyone's karma? Why single out children? It's the subconscious mind. It's most of it is subconscious. I mean, some of your volitions are conscious, but that's just the tip of the iceberg, so to speak. So let's see here. I mean, is there anything else that I can answer with regard to this question that I don't fully understand? Where is their karma and volition that make up the I? I mean, even demanding a location, I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me. Latitude, longitude, altitude above or below sea level, maybe put it into 4 dimensions with an exact time. I mean, how do you answer that question? But really, the karma of a child is not going to be all that different from the karma of an adult, especially at the deeper levels. At the surface level, sure. But near-death experiences and all that are not entirely at the surface level. So, again, I mean, if Master Po wants to specify how child near-death experiences are very different from adult near-death experiences, and why he's singling out children, because, the karma is really not that different. It's the adult karma that produces the child. And maybe use a different term than where, because, I mean, there is no spatial location. Yeah, I kind of throw up my hands on that one. So I'm just moving on to the next question. This is from the Saboteur. And the Saboteur says, would painful karma be in any way alleviated by spiritual practice? And I think the Saboteur is beginning to specialize in asking questions that I've already answered within just the past few Q&A videos. Because I'm pretty sure I have answered this one recently. But would painful karma be in any way alleviated by spiritual practice? Yes, in various ways. Like the example I've given from the suttas numerous times is where the Buddha compares a handful of salt with bad karma or akusala karma. And then he says, I mean, if you take this handful of salt and pour it into a cup of pure water, can you drink it? And the person he's asking says no, because it's way too salty. But if you take that same handful of salt and you pour it into a pool of pure water and let it dissolve, then can you drink that water? And the answer is yes, because the saltiness might hardly even be noticed if you dilute it down with way more water. And he compares that with like bad actions. Like if all you've done is bad actions, you know, if you've just done lots and lots of bad and hardly any good, then the result is not going to be watered down much with any kind of alleviating effects. But if you've done bad things and done even more good things, then there's going to be lots of like good karma that's kind of alleviating the bad. And I even gave an example just one or two Q&As ago about how, you know, I kept biting into rocks in my food out in the middle of nowhere where there's no dentists. And I was worried, you know, it's like, what happens if I break a tooth biting into a rock in my food out here in the middle of nowhere? But it didn't happen. What happened was I'm spending some time in one of the richest neighborhoods of Rangoon, and some servant girl gives me some bean curry with a rock in it. I break 3 teeth biting into this one rock. So it finally did happen. But as it turns out, that servant girl was the servant girl of the dean and rector of the Rangoon Dental College, the number one dentist in the entire country, the dentist of the dictator. And so I just walked right across the street and got my teeth fixed for free. And he just said, from now on, you need any dental help, just come right on over. He had a little dentist shop right in his house. And so for years, I had the same dentist as the dictator. So that would be like spiritual practice alleviating some of the painful karma just by adding some good luck in with the bad luck. But also spiritual practice increases your wisdom. So let's say, I mean, akusala karma reaches fruition. Akusala karma vipaka arises in the form of unpleasant experiences, unpleasant sensation, unpleasant feelings. And so if you do spiritual practice, you become wiser, you're better at dealing with unpleasantness. You know, you feel pain in your body, you can just be mindful of it. You can just observe it with detachment to some degree. Whereas a fool who hasn't been doing spiritual practice, then, I mean, they're just going to be more miserable than a sage under the same like physical circumstances, simply because the sage has done spiritual practice that allows them some philosophical detachment from what's going on. So that would be another way that spiritual practice or good karma would alleviate like the fruition of bad karma. You know, it at least waters it down, makes it not so bad. And there's probably other ways too, but I'm going to move on to the next question. This is from Maitreya Buddha. And Maitreya Buddha says, can you do a response to Sri Acharya Ji, a Vaishnavite Hare Krishna member? If there is no self, then who is experiencing nirvana? He claims that Buddha did teach Atman originally. And this Sri Acharya Ji is an interesting fellow. But I didn't know he was a Hare Krishna. He's not really a Hare Krishna, is he? I mean, he seems to me with his Sanatana Dharma, you know, he doesn't like the term Hindu. He prefers Sanatana Dharma. And so I mean, he seems to have like some yoga, maybe even some Vedanta under his belt. I don't think that he's just a Hare Krishna that just chants, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Hare, this kind of stuff. I think there's more to him than that. I mean, there's a good chance he's a Vaishnavite, but yeah, the Hare Krishna part is, it's a surprise to me if it is true. I'm not saying Maitreya Buddha is wrong, but I mean, if he is a Hare Krishna, that kind of complicates things. But back when I was a monk, there was a few people that told me that I was sort of like a Buddhist version of this person, which when I looked into him, I mean, to some degree, we were both, not as left wing as most teachers in the West. So, I mean, that would be kind of, just sort of being somewhat based to some degree, I guess. I mean, that's really, and plus we appear to be Westerns. He doesn't look Indian. So, to some degree, there was a similarity between me as a monk and him as a swami or whatever he happens to be called technically, an Acharya Ji. But I mean, I have watched some of his videos, and I mean, he seems to be a good man. He seems to have some wisdom. So I don't want to badmouth him. I don't want to indulge in any pisuna vacha, but he is very dogmatic. He has no doubt whatsoever that what he's teaching is true, even though a lot of it he couldn't possibly know that it's true. He just has faith in his religion, which is what most people have. It's like one of the reasons why he is an effective teacher is he shows no doubt whatsoever that what he's teaching is the one true religion, essentially. And that has a persuasive power on people. It kind of adds to charisma or whatever and causes him to be a very believable kind of teacher. I didn't really adopt that route with regard to Theravada Buddhism. I express skepticism plenty with regard to official doctrine, but this Sri Acharya Ji, he's just, this is the way it is. And I mean, I really don't have a lot of use for that, but some people do, and that's fine. I'm sure he's a good person. He's got some wisdom. I don't have anything bad I want to say about him, but he is very dogmatic. So, I mean, I watched the video that Maitreya Buddha had the link to, and he's talking about, I mean, it's an argument that came up on my Discord server not long ago. It's like the Visuddhimagga, the number one commentarial text in Theravada Buddhism is saying there is doing but no doer. And I'm saying that if there's a doing, I mean, there has to be a doer too. But I'm not insisting that there's a doer. I'm just saying that the doer doesn't exist and the doing also doesn't exist. The noun represents something that isn't real. The verb also represents something that isn't ultimately real. So, I mean, the argument of Sri Acharya Ji is that, it's like the doing is real, therefore there must be a doer. And I mean, it seems like the premise that the doing is real is like part of the problem. If he really is a Hare Krishna, that may account for why, there's not more sort of Advaita Vedanta in his teachings, because Advaita Vedanta gets very close to Buddhism, other than just Brahman. The only reality is Nirguna Brahman, which is like ultimate reality, which has no discernible characteristics. Which, I mean, if you're going to be reifying the absolute, that's about as subtle of a reification as you can get to. It's just infinite formless consciousness, but you can't even say that much because you can't say anything about it. That's sort of the Advaita Vedanta approach to ultimate truth. Whereas in Buddhism, you might occasionally, especially in Theravada, you might occasionally hint at it through like the state of Nibbana being blown out, that kind of thing. But as a general rule, Buddhism avoids reification of the absolute, because reification of the absolute, trying to explain the absolute, just drags it down into samsara. Anything described is samsaric. And Sri Acharya Ji was actually bragging a little bit in the video about how he just kept debating this Tibetan Lama, I think he was, a Tibetan Buddhist, until the Tibetan Buddhist says, okay, you're right, I agree. And it may be that the Tibetan is just like placating him, being conciliatory, saying, okay, yeah, you win, just for the sake of not arguing. Or it may be that this Tibetan is kind of so esoteric, so to speak, in his Buddhism that, he's agreeing with stuff that early Buddhism, at least, would not agree with. Also, I was looking through some of the comments, and there was a considerable amount of praise for Ken Wheeler, supposedly a Buddhist authority who just is like this champion for the idea that the Buddha did teach a soul. But the way Sri Acharya Ji is arguing, he seems to think that if there's walking, there has to be some real being who's walking, which would mean he hasn't advanced as far as Vedanta, apparently, in that he seems to be assuming there's an ultimately real individual soul like in Christianity. So I guess rather than just continue rambling about Sri Acharya Ji and Ken Wheeler, the world's leading authority on early Buddhism, even though he really does not understand the Pali language very well and just butchers it when he tries to do a translation. So the actual question, can you do a response? Okay, yes. The answer to that question is yes. And then the next question mark, if there is no self, then who is experiencing nirvana? Nobody. In fact, Sri Acharya Ji even went farther. It's like, if nobody experiences nirvana, then nirvana is meaningless. And I agree. Nirvana literally is meaningless because meaning is samsara. That's one thing that spiritual people, even relatively advanced spiritual people, it's a trap they fall into, including Sri Acharya Ji here apparently, is that you can't explain or describe ultimate reality in words because once it's in the form of words, it's samsaric. So, if there is no self, then who is experiencing nirvana? Nobody experiences it. It's like nirvana is like the blowing away of all this samsaric illusion. You're just right down there in reality. And it's not divided up into parts. So there's no being experiencing this ultimate reality. The being is illusory. So if there is no self, then who is experiencing nirvana? Nobody. And nirvana has no meaning because meaning is samsaric. So, meaning is just like, it's like an idea that's supposed to represent something else. So, it's not even the thing itself. It's not the Kantian thing in itself. It's just the thing as it seems at best. So you just get rid of all this thing as it seems stuff. And then all you've got left is reality, which has no meaning. It doesn't need a meaning because meaning is samsaric. And people that are just completely locked into their head just can't deal with that. But, you can't really change things in order to, well, I guess you could, but it's best not to try to change things in order to sort of pander to the limitations of intellectuals. So, Sri Acharya Ji, according to Maitreya Buddha, claims that the Buddha did teach Atman, or self, or soul, originally. Of course he does, because he wants to believe that his system is the one true system. Any system that disagrees with that, or even explains things differently, is necessarily wrong. But how he came up with the idea that the Buddha did teach Atman originally, I think it's just sort of like grammatical stuff. Like the Buddha is talking about this person and that person, even though ultimately they're not real. But it's like, well, why did he refer to them that way? It's things like that. I think he might have gotten a little more subtle, but it was that kind of argument that the Buddha was necessarily using Vohara Desana, worldly speech, in order to communicate to beings in samsara. And then that's considered to be a kind of proof that samsara is real. But even like in Vedanta, you've got the concept of Maya, which is illusion. It's all an illusion. So, I mean, if Sri Acharyaji really is a Hare Krishna, that would help to explain that part. But yeah, I do not think the Buddha taught Atman originally. I mean, it is possible he didn't teach Anatman either. Like in the Atthakavagga, which I consider to be one of the oldest Buddhist texts in existence, the Buddha says, no atta, no anatta. Oh, actually, it's no atta, no niratta, which it's like a play on words. It's like a pun. The wise man, the sage, has no atta and no niratta. And atta, in this sense, it's like a past participle for anything taken up. And then niratta is a past participle for nirajati, which means anything discarded. So it's like the surface meaning of these statements in the Atthakavagga. You find it more than once, that when a monk has no atta and no niratta, he has nothing taken up, nothing laid down. He doesn't have to acquire anything to become enlightened. He doesn't have to get rid of anything either, which is kind of paradoxical. But also, it's fairly obvious pun. Atta can mean self, niratta can mean no self. So it could also be taken at another level with a somewhat different meaning, that for the sage there is no self and no not self, because both of them are just ideas. They're just concepts. It's all samsara. Once you get into the level of ideas or thinking, symbols, it's samsara. It is not, you're no longer dealing with ultimate reality, if you ever were. So, I do not think that the Buddha did teach a soul originally, although it is possible that he didn't teach soul or not soul. And we may as well just leave Ken Wheeler entirely out of this. So, I hope I answer that question, because I'm moving on to the next one. This is from Romeo. And this is kind of a slightly controversial one, I guess. Romeo says, whether it's mandatory DEI training that employees are forced to take at work, or messages spread via movies and other media, Black Helen of Troy, anyone? The slogan, diversity is our strength, is constantly drummed into the minds of the citizenry of the U.S. and throughout the West. From my limited knowledge of history, cultural diversity being a strength is dubious. Take, for example, the former Yugoslavia, which eventually splintered among ethnic lines. I'm wondering whether this idea that diversity is our strength is based on anything substantial, or is simply an empty slogan mindlessly parroted. Based on your knowledge of history, which is quite impressive, is there any validity to the slogan, diversity is our strength? If so, where has it worked in history? And if the notion of diversity being a strength is just a glib, meaningless slogan, what is the ultimate purpose, the end game of those that promote it? Okay, so this is like 3 questions here, isn't it? 3 question marks. I gotta separate these so that I can deal with them in a proper order. Okay. So, the first question, is there any validity to the slogan, diversity is our strength? Well, yeah, there is some validity to the slogan, diversity is our strength. Like, especially with regard to diversity of view, diversity of opinion. Because if you're living in a society that has no diversity of opinion, and that might be the far right, and to the extent of just completely conservative traditionalist, and anything outside of that is heresy, burn them at the stake, that kind of stuff. And then at the other end, you've got communism, where you can't deviate from the party line or you're going to wind up in a gulag. So it's like the far right in the extent of extreme traditionalism, and the far left, which is like extreme ideological communism. I mean, both of those are without any kind of diversity of thought, and neither one of them makes progress easily, which is why Marxist countries have to essentially spy on non-Marxist countries to get ideas. And then even if the idea is true, if it doesn't fit in with Marxist ideology, off to the gulag you go. The Black Maria pulls in front of your house in the middle of the night, they bang on your door, and you disappear. So, there is strength in diversity of opinions, where within some stability, some cultural stability from at least people sharing most of the same values, at least being on the same page with regard to just standing for something. Everyone kind of shares enough of a worldview that they can get along. Then it's good to have a diversity of views, diversity of opinions within a certain stable, the stability triangle. I've been taking forklift training again lately, so I got the stability triangle on my mind. So yeah, it's good to have new ideas, like the ancient Romans, the early Roman Republic. They were very traditionalist in many respects, but nevertheless, if they came across an idea in some other culture that seemed like a good idea, like it was some military innovation that was effective in combat, they'd embrace that. They were relatively open-minded with regard to gods and goddesses. The Senate did clamp down on Isis worship or Maenads, this kind of thing. But still, there was a wide variety of religious views, philosophies, and so forth. So ancient Rome, it was culturally diverse also, which sometimes was okay and sometimes wasn't. Alexandria was one of the most cosmopolitan cities in the empire, and it was notorious for just rioting in the streets, the city in flames over and over again. But a certain amount of chaos actually helps to inspire genius. The Italian Renaissance would be another one of these cases of, ethnically pretty similar. There wasn't a whole lot of ethnic diversity or even an extremely large amount of cultural diversity, but still there was promotion of independent thought. So that's the main strength of diversity, is diversity of thought within reason. Because at least everyone should be more or less in agreement on basic principles. Civic nationalism in the United States, that sort of took the place of religion in America. Whereas, you have, everyone believes in the Constitution. They believe in individual liberty and equality under the law, equality of rights, equality of opportunities, this kind of stuff. But then there's still a lot of room for technological innovations, artistic innovations, all this kind of different kinds of, military innovations, intellectual innovations, just within this framework that's keeping things more or less stable. But the Roman Empire was definitely multicultural. So, let's see. Yeah, so there is validity to the slogan, diversity is our strength, within reason, so long as the diversity isn't so diverse that it just causes the society to fragment into warring tribes. There has to be some overall agreement that everybody has. It's two people are going to debate. There still has to be some kind of rules and agreements for them to have a debate, even though they're disagreeing with each other. There has to be sort of a common ground of agreement in order for the debate to have any meaning whatsoever. So, let's see. Romeo says, okay, if so, where has it worked in history? And I did point out that, the Roman Empire especially was culturally diverse. For the most part, the diverse cultures kind of stayed in their own homelands. In the big cities, you'd have, merchants and so on and so forth, soldiers coming from other cultures. And you just had to be open-minded to some degree, have a certain amount of acceptance within reason. But, you couldn't be having people preaching against the emperor, once you got the empire. You can't have, open subversion. that kind of thing. I mean, the Roman government would clamp down on like political subversion pretty harshly. But I mean, Elagabalus was emperor of Rome for a while. He's considered to be one of the tyrants of Rome. He was apparently a transsexual. He was Syrian. He worshipped this meteoric black rock that fell out of the sky. He was very different from your average Roman, especially your average Italian Roman. But I mean, he didn't last very long, but still, I mean, it didn't cause the collapse of the empire. Rome was already kind of in decline at that point, I have to admit. So, yeah, that kind of diversity has worked in history. I mean, even like a certain amount of diversity has worked in America, obviously. The United States of America, is relatively diverse and culturally diverse, within the context of Western civilization. It wasn't until like 1965 that the floodgates were opened for people that weren't even of European ancestry to just flood into the country. And that has destabilized the civic nationalism and constitutionalism of the United States and is resulting in destabilization of just the fabric of the civilization itself. And Renaissance Italy, again, it was ethnically very homogeneous, but at least there was like independence of thought going on. And I guess if you've got people of different cultures, they're going to think differently. So that can help to bring in a certain amount of, just intellectual or ideological diversity. But still, there has to be some common ground where everyone agrees, with regard to basic principles, human rights, for example. So I guess I kind of answered the first two questions. Let's move on to the third one from Romeo here. And if the notion of diversity being a strength is just a glib, meaningless slogan, what is the ultimate purpose, the end game of those that promote it? Well, I think that different promoters of diversity is our strength. Most of them on the left, the ultimate purpose differs from one of them to the next. I mean, some of them, they really are just trying to take down Western civilization because they have more or less of a communistic idea of everyone being equal. And obviously, Western civilization has just excelled with regard to accomplishments, just establishing, new precedents and so forth. So you can't really have some kind of equal, homogeneous global world government so long as you got anyone that's standing out. There was some tyrant of Syracuse who, I can't remember if it was Plato or some other philosopher, he's showing how you stay in control of your people, as like a ruler. And he just took him out into a wheat field and just had one of the servants just cut off all the heads of wheat that stuck up above the rest. You just got to keep everyone at this level of mediocrity, standardized, enforced, mandatory mediocrity. And I think to some degree, some of these Davos people might have that in mind with regard to just overwhelming the nations of Western civilization with third world barbarians, so to speak. Well, some of them really believe in it, I guess. They might just accept the diversity, the diversity is our strength idea at a much broader level than I have accepted it. But, I mean, there are a lot of people on the left are ideologues. They prefer this seemingly beautiful ideology to the ugly facts of empirical reality. They just, for some reason, they can just tune out reality and think that this ideology is so nice, it's so utopian, that it has to be true, and all we have to do is just implement it at gunpoint if necessary, and everything will be wonderful. And it just doesn't work that way. So let's see, I gotta read this question one more time. Just make sure that I've answered it. If the notion of diversity being a strength is just a glib, meaningless slogan, and I don't know. I mean, it has a core of truth to it. What is the ultimate purpose, the end game of those who promote it? And I do think that taking down Western civilization in order to sort of level the playing field of globalism is a major part of that. Some of it is just genuine resentment against white people because they can't accept that Western civilization really is greater than other civilizations have been. And so they just say, well, they're just villains who have used brute force. You know, they're just violent barbarians who have, you know, spread their language and, you know, their technology, their politics all over the world. Religion, you name it. So a certain resentment against successful people is part of it. Just a desire to just level the global playing field to make people more docile, easier to control. There's probably other reasons too, but I think those are some of the major ones. And I guess I'm just going to move on to the next question. That's what I'm going to do. This is from Rui. And Rui says, can you recall moments during your anchorite days in which there was only the seen in the seen, the felt in the felt, etc.? Not sure if I've asked this one before. That being the case, apologies. Okay, so he's asking me if during my practice as a monk that I really was able to implement the instructions to Bahya in the Bahya Sutta given by the Buddha standing in town to Bahya, the non-Buddhist ascetic. And in the seen, there will be only the seen. In the heard, there will be only the heard. In the felt, there will be only the felt. In the mentally sensed, there will be only the mentally sensed. Thus should you train yourself. Which is, I mean, you're at the level of as close as possible to bare sensation without any kind of like mental commentary, mental like attribution of meaning to that. And I don't think I don't think I ever did it perfectly. I mean, it's something that you're trying to cultivate. But that was one of the main ways that I would do walking meditation. I remember a lot of the time, just, you know, central Burma, you're out there at night. It pretty much has to be a full moon night or a night with enough light that you can see like vipers and scorpions and that sort of thing that you might step on. But I just do walking meditation, just not thinking, just kind of being aware of the sensorium as when doing walking meditation, not interpreting what I'm seeing, not interpreting what I'm hearing, no interpretation, or at least that's what you're trying for. You know, you're just trying to be at the level of bare sensation as much as you can in order to, you know, just prevent your mind just running off in this samsaric commentary. So yeah, I practiced it a lot. I never fully mastered it. But even meditation, I mean, that's largely the kind of meditation that I was doing when sitting cross-legged also, especially after my first 10 years or so, when I finally started getting into deeper levels of meditation. That, I mean, even when you're meditating, like this, the breathing, you know, you're doing anapana, that I never really liked breathing in, breathing out, breathing in, breathing out. It was just more just observing the sensation of touch of the air passing the nostrils. And then that's it. It's just the felt. There's only the felt. You're not interpreting that. You know, you're not following the air in and out, anything like that. I mean, you just direct your attention to something that's going on and then just are aware of that without any kind of commentary or interpretation. So yeah, I practiced it a lot. And sometimes even, I mean, even nowadays, you're like in an industrial environment. There's all this stuff going on. Just every once in a while, it just becomes like this stimuli that you're not even really interpreting. You know, it's just sort of you're kind of returning to the center, so to speak, to use new agey kind of language. Just sort of centering yourself to some degree. But yeah, I mean, that is really like the essence of Buddhist practice from my point of view, is just getting to that level or getting as close to that level as you can. And so I did it plenty. Not perfectly, but I was trying to cultivate it. So I guess I'm just going to move on to the next question, which is from Athena's Sigil. And Athena's Sigil says, is your lady and new wife a Buddhist too? To some degree. She has interest in it. Although sometimes if I'm being just too idealistically Buddhist for her tastes, then she'll consider that I'm just naive and that I'm not good at functioning in the real world. But yeah, she's sort of like a fellow traveler, I guess. I mean, she has told people that she's a Buddhist, and that's nice. And, to some degree she is, although if it really comes down to, I don't know how to say it. But, I mean, sometimes she just starts thinking that it's just like this idealistic theory that doesn't really apply to reality very well. And I really think that it applies to reality better than worldly, secular kinds of ways of dealing with things. So, yeah, kind of. I mean, my father considered himself to be a Buddhist also, although he was more of like an animist than anything else. So, if you consider yourself to be a Buddhist, and there was some Buddhist Congress or something many years ago at this point, where they were trying to actually define what a Buddhist is, and the best they could come up with is anyone who considers themselves to be a Buddhist is a Buddhist. So if that's the case, and she considers herself to be a Buddhist, then yes. Although certain teachings of Buddhism that I take very seriously, she doesn't take as seriously. I'm just going to move on to the next question before I get into trouble. This next one is from RFS. And RFS says, any plans to move the Discord group to Telegram due to the Discord ID verification policy? Well, I haven't really considered that. I mean, the new Discord ID verification policy hasn't really touched me yet that I'm aware of. It hasn't influenced me at all. I mean, I've encountered none of it thus far. There's been no change in that regard for me. And so probably not, unless they start getting like Orwellian, then maybe. But at present, yeah, there's no plans whatsoever to move the Discord group to Telegram, because there has been no change from my point of view in the actual functioning of Discord. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Fred. And Fred says, the way I see it, all his suttas, I think he's referring to the Buddha here. So I'll start over. Fred says, the way I see it, all the Buddha's suttas must be from mundane speech, so logic seems to it being only a path guidance? ? Even the first sermon doesn't present anything mind-blowing, in my opinion. Okay, well, Fred, sometimes he asks questions you're not exactly sure if he's expecting an answer. But there is a question mark here, so I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt here. I would address the last part first. He says, even the first sermon doesn't present anything mind-blowing, in my opinion. Yeah, well, I mean, you're probably used to it. You're used to Buddhism. It might be a little more mind-blowing if you've never heard of Dhamma before. You're some sort of ascetic. It's like the first sermon was delivered to 5 hardcore ascetics, where the Buddha is teaching the middle path and the Four Noble Truths. And the Four Noble Truths are, especially the first 3, are relatively mind-blowing. I mean, if you've never been exposed to them before, if you're already used to it, then maybe not. It might not seem so mind-blowing. But, I mean, the very first time you're exposed to it, especially if you're really striving wholeheartedly, like the 5 ascetic colleagues of the Buddha were, then, yeah, it might be relatively mind-blowing for him. And, of course, if you're a fully enlightened Buddha, you may be able to just intuitively tell people exactly what they need to hear. And so, his first sermon may have just been exactly what they needed to hear, even though it might not seem particularly earth-shaking to somebody else. But let's get back to the actual question here, which has some odd grammar to it that causes me to not fully understand it. He says, the way I see it, all his suttas must be from mundane speech, so logic seems to it being only a path guidance. I don't understand that. Logic, I mean, the first part I understand. All his suttas must be from mundane speech. Yeah, that's Wohara Desana. I already mentioned that. You have to use the language of the world in order to communicate to beings in the world. So logic seems to it being only a path guidance. That part mystifies me. I mean, logic would also be mundane. So, I mean, logic isn't super mundane. Logic is just part of worldly speech, which makes worldly speech a little more effective in certain ways, better at weeding out bullshit, that kind of thing. Seems to it being only a path guidance. That part I don't understand. Sometimes I get asked questions that, especially recently, where I just cannot figure out what the question is. Right there in front of me, and I do not understand it. So, if you do ask questions, I ask you, please, just for starters, try to spell things correctly and use proper punctuation and so forth, because I have some minor OCD with regard to that, and I might be have this compulsive urge to fix it. But also, just imagine someone who isn't you reading that question. Just kind of imagine yourself reading that question for the first time, and would you understand your own question? Because some people are asking questions, it's they apparently know what they're asking. They understand their own question, but it's sort of like my mother, especially when she was getting older, she'd write me letters when I was a monk in Burma. I'd get a letter from her talking about how she did this or he said that, and she never says who she or he was. It's like she just assumes that you can fill in the blanks the way she can fill in the blanks, and it just doesn't work that way. The whole Burmese language is that way. It's kind of like a lazy language with lots of blanks. You just kind of a lot of assumptions where you just assume the other person will understand what you're saying, so you don't completely flesh out the statement. Because Burmese people tend to think more alike than Western people do. So, it's sometimes a Burmese person would ask me, how long has it been? And I'd say, how long has what been? And they say, yes. And again, I'll say, how long has what been? And they'll say, yes. And it's it's what do you do? Guess? And then they just giggle at you because you answered the question completely differently from the way a Burmese person would answer it. So, yeah, logic is only a path guidance. I really don't know what that means. So I'm just going to move on to Fred's second question, which is as follows. How can you stop rebirth if you still have bodily needs? And then in capital letters, food, clothing, shelter, and then back in small letters again, the list goes on, ? So, what does food, clothing, and shelter have to do with stopping rebirth? It's if you still have bodily needs. But see, this is one of the things that I've tried to explain so many times, and a lot of people who are just kind of locked into an intellectual understanding of things, it just doesn't work. It's how do I even start with this? You have bodily needs, food, clothing, shelter. Might as well throw in medicine for the sick to get the 4 requisites. How does that stop you from becoming enlightened? The Buddha had bodily needs, food, clothing, shelter, medicine for the sick, and he became enlightened. Enlightenment is a matter of mental states, at least at the worldly level. Man. Some questions, I'm not exactly sure how to answer them. How can you stop rebirth if you still have bodily needs are not the same as desires and preferences and delusion. I mean, so long as you insist that the bodily needs are real, then you're in the realm of delusion, because ultimately, bodily needs don't ultimately exist. They conditionally exist in accordance with dependent co-arising in a samsaric, like quasi-world, a pseudo-reality. It's virtual reality. So you've got virtual bodily needs. Your virtual body needs virtual food, virtual clothing, and virtual shelter. But when you transcend that, when you realize that it's all just virtual, it's not ultimately real, then, I mean, within the illusion, the virtual body still needs virtual food, etc. But, I mean, you're just not identified with that anymore. So it's transcending the system rather than eradicating it. And that's one thing. It's very common. I mean, I used to do this as a junior monk, for example. You have to eradicate the defilements. But it's like, once you fully realize that the defilements aren't ultimately real, then there's no longer any need to eradicate them. It just becomes irrelevant. So let's just kind of wrestle and chew on this a little more. How can you stop rebirth if you still have bodily needs? Yeah, I mean, you don't still have bodily needs at one level because it's not ultimately real. And rebirth isn't ultimately real either. I mean, so it's not even really a matter of stopping rebirth. It's just like going beyond it, so that just the whole samsaric system becomes irrelevant. But let's just try and stay within the realm, stay within the scope of orthodox Theravada. Let's be orthodox here for a few minutes. So you have bodily needs, but a bodily need is not the same as craving for food, craving for clothing, craving for shelter. See, that's where the problem comes in. Second noble truth, all suffering is caused by desire. All suffering is not caused by bodily needs, it's caused by craving. So your body needs food. I mean, that's not suffering. That's not like clinging to rebirth or clinging to samsara, any such thing. It's when you start craving food, when you have attachment for food, which is different. That's when you get stuck in samsara. And that's just a straightforward orthodox explanation, which I probably should have started with and been content with that instead of getting off into something else. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Philalethes. Philalethes says, is it possible to be a good Buddhist and an artist or fiction writer? And I don't mean a monk artist who just makes religious writings, art forms, and traditional motifs. I think it is possible. I think damn near anything is possible. So I think it's possible to be a good Buddhist and an artist or fiction writer, especially if, I mean, your art doesn't have to be like traditional religious art, but still it can be uplifting. Or even something like Jackson Pollock, who just splattered paint onto a canvas and deliberately tried not to have any meaning whatsoever. I mean, that could actually be helpful to some degree from a Buddhist point of view, because you look at this thing, your mind wants to interpret it, wants to attribute meaning to it, and it's just kind of stymied. I mean, it gets to the meaning of this painting by Jackson Pollock, you know, this color scheme and the balance and everything. But still, I mean, it's reducing the amount of meaning that is polluting your mind at that moment. You know, any kind of uplifting, you know, the good guy, even like Charles Dickens. I mean, Charles Dickens was a worldly kind of deluded guy. But, I mean, at least the good guy always wins. That's very reliable in Charles Dickens. The good guy wins, the bad guy loses. You know, everyone gets what they deserve, mostly. Every once in a while, you might have some tragic loss. What was his name? The slightly retarded guy, Nicholas Nickleby. Snape? Was that his name? No, not Snape. It was something like Snape. He dies, but in a way it was kind of necessary for him to die because he had this crush on Nicholas's sister and it was never meant to be, and et cetera, et cetera. But so long as it's like uplifting, it's like you cause the person to be a little less attached and a little less delusional. Sure. It's something that this, like really great art should have like an uplifting effect. Great architecture also, So, yeah, I think that it is possible to be a good Buddhist and an artist or fiction writer. Even though it's kind of borderline from a really orthodox, ancient Indian, early Buddhist point of view. So, I think I'm just going to move on to Philalethi's second question. Ever read Kierkegaard's Either Or? Feels kind of relevant to your philosophical interests as it carefully dissects what belief even is and makes sense of it in the context of human life. No, I haven't read any Kierkegaard. I've read about Kierkegaard. And I've read Jnanavira, like the letters of Jnanavira, who was an eccentric intellectual British bhikkhu who was ordained back in like 1950 in Ceylon. And he was very much into existentialism. He was always talking about existentialism in his letters. And Kierkegaard was a kind of proto-existentialist. Kierkegaard technically wasn't an existentialist, but he was bringing up ideas that became like core ideas to like the mid 20th century existentialists. So I've read about Kierkegaard. I know that he was more or less of an existentialist, even though I'm pretty sure he was also a Christian. So let's see. Yeah, it feels kind of relevant to your philosophical interests as it carefully dissects what belief even is. Yeah, there was some back and forth on that just today and yesterday on the Discord server. What is belief? What's the difference between belief and faith? What's the difference between belief and knowledge? That kind of thing. But I think belief is perception. I think that belief is just built into perception. And so you just have like this stray image of something arises in your mind. There's already belief there. But the belief is very much strengthened if you hook it up into an interlocking pattern where it's all mutually supporting and like stabilizing. Then the belief gets way deeper. But even just some random stray image that arises already has a certain amount of belief built into that. And belief is delusion. Belief is thinking that you know something that you don't really know. And since faith is a kind of belief, for the most part, set aside something like St. John of the Cross's dark faith. But as a general rule, faith, what most people consider to be faith, is believing in something, which, from my point of view, is delusional. I've never really had a whole lot of faith, to some degree. And you have to have a working hypothesis. So for me, working hypotheses take the place of faith as much as possible. A working hypothesis, you don't have to believe that it's true. You're just assuming, because you've got to assume something in this world, that it seems like it could work, and so you give it a shot. Working hypothesis, I think, is preferable to actual faith. But I'm sure a lot of Christians, even a lot of Buddhists, would disagree with that statement. I'm pretty sure, and I mentioned this in the Discord server, that I'm pretty sure that it's in the epistles of Paul in the New Testament, where Paul admits that all this stuff he's insisting on, he doesn't really know. Because then it would be knowledge and not faith. Somehow faith is even better than knowledge, apparently. But faith is ultimately delusional because you think you know something that you don't really know. So, yeah, I probably am never going to read Kierkegaard. It's just, I don't read many books anymore. I'm not alone in a cave and not distracted so that I could read just the densest, thickest, most boring book imaginable, like Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, and just expect to make it to the end of the book. I've got F.H. Bradley's Principles of Logic on that bookcase back there. I've been meaning to read that for decades at this point. Probably will never read it because it's so dense, and there's so many convenient distractions in worldly life, especially when there's internet now, that I'd rather just acquire my information in like short articles. So yeah, I haven't read any Kierkegaard, although I have read about Kierkegaard, and that's about as far as it gets. So I'm just going to move on to Philalethes' third question. He says, are you ever met with any anxieties with regard to the question of personal legacy, whether procreative, creative, or any other kind? And since I'm assuming the answer is no, how do you get to that level where you no longer yearn thereof? Well, yeah, the answer is pretty much no. I mean, I don't have any anxieties with regard to the question of personal legacy. I haven't fathered any children that I'm aware of. Whether I become like famous after I die, I mean, it doesn't really matter, partly just because I don't consider this samsaric world to be real. It's just kind of a dream that hopefully you wake up from. So it's like, before I wake up from the dream, I mean, am I worried about, whether I'm going to become famous to the people left behind in the dream after I wake up? In a way, it's just like your world, the world that you're creating, just kind of poofs out of existence when you die anyway. So, I mean, it's never really struck me as anything important. Like some people worry, like they don't want to be naked when they die, or like they want to like delete files from their computer before they die. They don't want someone to see their porn collection or whatever. But for me, it's like, I'm going to be dead. What difference does it make? I mean, it's just, yeah, for some reason, it's just, I've never really been concerned with that sort of thing. I really don't care if I die naked. For example, I mean, I can do these videos with just messy hair and just being all scruffy and disheveled, and it kind of bothers my wife sometimes. But like just yesterday, she wanted me to come along with her to somewhere, and I was wearing like this Alex Jones InfoWars t-shirt, and she's trying to get me to change my t-shirt. It's like, no, I'm not going to be catering to the preferences of strangers. So I really don't care. I mean, it's like anything of importance you're going to take with you. The only thing you take with you is your karma anyway. So, I mean, I don't know. It doesn't really matter. Let's see. But I guess part of the question is, how do you get to that level where you no longer yearn thereof? Well, I think I was pretty much always at that level. I mean, even as a kid, I wasn't worried about what was going to happen after I die. After me, the deluge. I don't remember the original French for that. So yeah, in my case, it's just like a personality quirk. I was just born that way, I guess. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Siddhartha Lohachita. And Siddhartha Lohachita asks kind of strange questions. Maybe he knows something that I don't. He says, what would you do if you go to prison? Would you practice Dhamma inside there? And that's going to depend on the prison. I remember Mahatma Gandhi spent time in prison, and he used to refer to prison as his ashram, because, you're just alone in a cell. Monasteries have cells. Prisons also have cells. So there is a certain similarity there, but it would, what I do in prison would depend on just the environment. Am I in solitary confinement? Could I even request solitary confinement? In that case, if you could request solitary confinement, there'd be like a heavy vibe associated with the place, because you might have some mass murderer in the cell next to you. Even though you can't speak with them or anything, there's still kind of like this subliminal empathic, telepathic vibe thing going on. But yeah, I mean, so long as I was able to, as long as you don't have people like throwing pee on me from the other cell or that kind of thing, then, I mean, even then, I mean, you don't, I mean, there's going to be some self-discipline and that sort of thing. There's going to be some kind of Dhamma practice. I mean, there's any situation you can do some kind of Dhamma practice. Just exercise patience, for example. Just have few desires, which would make sense if you're in prison. If you're living in prison, you should have as few desires as possible, I suppose. You don't want to just be craving ice cream all the time when you don't get any. So, yeah, I mean, to the extent that I was able, I would practice Dhamma in prison, but it would depend a lot on what the environment was like. You know, am I going to be in the same cell with murderers, or am I going to be like relatively alone, or am I going to be like bunking with some mild-mannered guy who committed insurance fraud? You know, it's just going to depend a lot on the circumstances. All prisons are not the same. So, I'm just going to move on to Siddhartha Lohachita's next question. Let's see here. In the Mahila Mukha Jataka, where the Buddha, while still a bodhisattva, resolves the problem of an elephant that had been corrupted and instilled with murderous instincts after being exposed to the speech of some thieves who were hiding in the stable, similar to what Plato says in his book The Republic, that speeches form behavior, should we prohibit, or how should we deal with discourses that are directly akusala and harmful to others if we were able to do something? Words can shape or distort the collective mind, and therefore their restriction is sometimes justified, and I think this clashes with notions such as free speech. Okay, well, I never did read the Mahila Mukha Jataka. I was never really all that interested in Jataka stories, just because, you know, they're obviously late. You know, a lot of them are just non-Buddhist stories with some Buddhism added, that kind of thing. I mean, it could be interesting just for learning about ancient Indian culture and so forth, although the Dhammapada commentary is better for that, in my opinion. But you got the problem of an elephant that had been corrupted and instilled with murderous instincts after being exposed to the speech of some thieves. I mean, this is attributing human intelligence and understanding of human speech to an elephant, which, yeah, I mean, that's a little bit sus, in my opinion. So let's just disregard that part. So should we prohibit, or how should we deal with discourses that are directly akusala and harmful to others? Well, I mean, stuff that's clearly harmful to others, you know, then that's already illegal in the United States. You know, it's like the classic example is yelling fire in a crowded theater. You know, that's illegal. Or else, you know, it's like, get him, you know, in like promoting violence. That kind of thing is already illegal. But, I mean, once you start making laws like that prohibit saying anything unpatriotic, saying anything racist, that sort of thing, saying anything that offends a minority group or a member of a minority group, then those laws can be abused. You know, it's like, who's going to be in power? And even though you might have some, you know, relatively wise political faction making laws against certain kinds of speech, they might get, you know, ousted in the next election. Then you've got like Marxists taking over who are just going to completely abuse that. So you're better off with a certain amount of chaos due to freedom of speech than regimenting what people are allowed to say, because inevitably it's going to be abused. It's going to turn into tyranny. It is a slippery slope. I hate that term. It came to mind. But, you know, it's like a lot of the moral degeneracy, like the decadence in Western culture, is due to like ideas of freedom of speech, you know, like female impersonators reading stories to toddlers in libraries, gay pride parades with all sorts of indecent exposure going on. It's all, or just like TV shows, TV series, like degenerating from like I Dream of Jeannie, where Barbara Eden wasn't even allowed to show her belly button in the first season of the show because it was considered too risque. Elvis Presley, when he was on the Ed Sullivan Show back in black and white in the 50s, they wouldn't show him from the waist down because it was considered too risque, the way he was swiveling his hips and so forth when he was singing, that kind of thing. Maybe, some of that is okay. It's best if it's just culturally enforced, which is the way it used to be. But now you got like Game of Thrones and just like practically pornography on television that anybody can watch as long as they pay for it. So yeah, there's a certain amount of debate that should go on where you draw the line with regard to freedom of speech, but you're better off erring on the side of too much freedom than not enough freedom, it seems to me. Unless you want like more of a regimented, more or less fascistic society, like maybe some periods in the Roman Republic or Empire could qualify for that, where everyone has to be really on the same page, but still there has to be, like I was mentioning earlier, some freedom of thought, some freedom of expression. You don't want to be so traditionalist or so ideological that any deviation from what everyone else is believing is punished. So, gosh, yeah, I do think a certain amount of just chaos is better than just having everything regimented and controlled. Especially when the wrong people get into power and start regimenting and controlling in a way that is just Orwellian. So yeah, it's better to have too much freedom than not enough, in my opinion. Let's see. Did I answer the question? Should we prohibit, or how should we deal with discourses that are directly akusala and harmful to others? Like heavy metal music that praises Satan and this kind of thing. That was an issue back in the 80s. I remember that. Yeah, to have... it's really tricky. How do you deal with it? The ancient Romans had the position of censor, where, he was like, he had the power to overthrow a law or some such that really was undermining the moral purity of the nation, that kind of thing. Ironically, the emperors just sort of inherited that position of censor along with a number of other positions like Pontifex Maximus. But yeah, one thing to bear in mind is that samsara is always going to be fucked up. Humans are fucked up. Any society created by humans is going to be fucked up. There's always going to be stuff going wrong. So, maybe you could be very philosophical and just accept the cycle of history. Strong men make good times make weak men make bad times make strong men. It's just this, just accept it as a kind of inevitable cycle. And right now we're in the good times make weak men phase. We hardly even touched the weak men make bad times phase yet, this time around. But I don't think that there really is any way to stop that. Maybe there is some kind of hard reset. But still, you can't have just too much like restraint on the people. Because, like I was mentioning before, there's going to be no ideological diversity, no forwards motion, really. Plus, people should, to some degree, have the right to be foolish and make their own mistakes. It's just that you should have a society that very much endorses a certain order and certain ideals, that kind of thing. But once you like put that in the power or the control of the government, then it's going to be abused. It's just, I mean, you're never going to fix samsara. Samsara is always going to be messed up. So long as it is created by messed up humans, it's going to be messed up. And so I think it is better to err on the side of too much freedom than not enough. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Hui Cheer. And Hui Cheer says, I have a question on reincarnation and timeline. Is it possible for people who die in 2026 to be reborn in 1875? Meaning time is not linear. The soul, in quotes, can be reborn in any point of the timeline according to their karma, which also means tomorrow happened before. Anyway, congratulations on your wedding. Well, congratulations. Thank you for the congratulations. See, we don't. Maybe I shouldn't have. It wasn't necessary to read that part, but it's been done. So my father used to believe that, and my father used to hope that he'd be reborn in the Stone Age. You know, he was just cut out. I mean, just constitutionally, he was cut out to be some sort of like shaman warrior in a Stone Age tribe. Just he, like I said before, he was more animistic than anything else. And he would have been happiest in, just being like a warrior / shaman in some Stone Age tribe. But time would have to be different, I think, in order for it to work that way, because, from the Buddhist point of view, 1875 has already happened. So if you're going to be reborn into 1875, you've already been reborn into 1875. I mean, it's possible. I assume it's possible. And also, I mean, there's more than one 1875. I do think that there isn't just one version of samsara. That it is possible to just get reborn like sideways into a kind of alternate timeline, alternate reality or whatever. So I'm not going to rule out the possibility of it. I can't really insist one way or the other because I don't know for sure exactly how it works. But I do think that it is possible, even though there's a good chance it doesn't usually work that way, just because people have this time and space categories, Kant called them categories, sort of built in so that we just are obedient to these self-imposed limitations that we have created. But yeah, it is a good question. I mean, can you be reborn into the past? And I won't say that I think it's probably possible, which means it probably happens, but I would guess that it's not the norm. But I mean, I do think that there are like parallel universes, so to speak. The many worlds hypothesis. I mean, my whole point of view, my theory of everything is the uncarved block of marble, as I've harped away at many times. So, I mean, within the context of the block of marble, it should be possible. It might be a different 1875 than the historical one behind us. See, that's the thing. It could be like this alternate 1875 you're being reborn into. I think that might be more likely than, just being reborn and becoming your own grandfather or something. My father believed that I was a reincarnation of his grandfather. But whether it's possible for me to be reborn as my own grandfather after this, I mean, it might have to be like a different version of reality. You're going sideways instead of forwards or backwards in time. But again, I really can't answer the question with certainty one way or the other than I assume it is possible, even if it is not the norm. And so I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Andre A. or Andrea. I'm not exactly sure. It's Andre and then a capital A with no space. Andre A. or Andrea. You decide. And whatever this person's name is, this person asks, if all beings are illusory, their actions will be illusory as well. It is still hard to me to understand how an illusion could produce true results. Are the consequences also illusory? Yes. It's the Matrix. It's a dream. So yeah, I mean, it's the doer is illusory. The action done is also illusory. The consequences of the action done are also illusory. The only reality is nibbana. The only reality is just the absolute itself, which is not divided up into parts. At least not like potentially it could be, which is what creates the 10,000 things of samsara. But gosh, trying to explain this stuff, I'm telling you, it's not easy sometimes. So, are the consequences also illusory? The answer is a very simple yes. So, let's just move on to the person's second question. The person says, I once saw a Dzogchen teacher saying that an awakened being is free to do whatever he wants, even killing, slandering, cheating, ... It is total freedom, and awakening or enlightenment has nothing to do with being good. Emotions, good or bad, are fluctuations of the mind, and the purpose is to stay immovable, steady. That is why there is a strong emphasis in developing metta or bodhicitta, sort of moral training. And then the actual question is, sounds like that an awakened being is almost like a psychopath. What is your view? No, I wouldn't say that an enlightened being is like a psychopath. A psychopath is a person who, it's like they have no empathy, at least not at the conscious level. A psychopath would be a person with lots of subconscious shit going on that this like very tightly self-contained ego is oblivious to. That's why they don't have much of a conscience. They don't have much of a moral sense. They got like no empathy. They don't feel a connection with other beings, really. At least that's my understanding. Not being a psychopath, I really can't say for sure, but that is the impression I get. Whereas an enlightened being, if they're fully enlightened, they might not even have a subconscious mind anymore. It might be all conscious at that point. And they're going to definitely have empathy. There's going to be connection. It's like Pink Floyd's wall is down. If you're a fully enlightened being, you're no longer separated by Pink Floyd's wall from the rest of everybody else. There's no longer this differentiation of I and not I. It's just all, it's just the full spectrum is there. So it's very different from a psychopath who is, in a way, a kind of spiritual cripple. Because they're just completely contained within this hardened ego with like this shell around it. And so they're completely cut off even from their own subconscious mind. In my opinion, that's the impression I get. But getting back to the freedom, I used to take issue with this myself, where you read in the Pali Suttas that, for example, an enlightened being or even a Sotapanna cannot tell a lie. They just can't. It's impossible. And that's not freedom. That's not liberation. At least, it seems more likely that they'd be like Jordan Peterson said long ago, back when he was still relatively based. He said, you should be able to be a monster and then not be one. Not that you should be unable to be a monster. It's just that you're able, but you just aren't a monster. And that would come closer to what the sage is doing, seems to me. So, let's see. There's so many ways of, again, we're trying to discuss what's going on with an enlightened being when they've just gone off the scale. Anything you say about them is going to be invalid. But like I've said many times on these Q&A videos, Ram Dass used to say about his teacher, Neem Karoli Baba, whose picture is right up there on top of the bookcase, Ram Dass said about him that the more you get to know him, the more you realize that there's really nobody there. He's just a mirror shining your own karma back at you. So, yeah, I mean, an enlightened being, I mean, they're no longer like an individual person. They might appear that way to an unenlightened observer, but subjectively, if that even makes any sense anymore, they're no longer this individual person who's separate from everything else. And Neem Karoli Baba up there, he used to do stuff that, according to Theravada Buddhism, a fully enlightened being or even a particularly wise one would not do. I mean, he'd just be like roaring at people and like laughing and crying and like hitting people with fruit, throwing fruit at people, punching them. He'd be doing all this weird stuff that like the stereotypical Buddhist sage would not and even could not do. So that's one, like a dogmatic Theravadan would say, well, there you go. Neem Karoli Baba couldn't have been enlightened. He couldn't even been all that wise. He was a Hindu with a wrong view. But, I mean, that could just be the dogmatic limitations of said devout dogmatic Buddhists. So, I think that a fully enlightened being, they're still capable of doing some of this stuff, but it's like, let's just go with St. John of the Cross and his description of the Catholic enlightened being, the person who has reached the stage of perfection, which shouldn't exist. It's like you read the Bible and no one is worthy. The only way you get into heaven is through divine grace and all that. But according to St. John of the Cross, the mystical doctor of the Catholic Church, that you can reach the stage of perfection where you have mortified your own self-will. And so, because you're no longer motivated by your own self-will, you are motivated by the will of God. You become just like this empty vessel of divinity. You're like God's puppet. And so, you just do what God wants you to do, which is sort of like what Ram Dass was saying about Neem Karoli Baba, where there's nobody there. It's just a mirror reflecting your own karma back at you. In which case, I mean, it might be possible for an enlightened being to do things that Theravada Buddhism would say they can't possibly do. They just can't. Even though they're liberated, they're completely free. They couldn't even tell a lie. Even if, I mean, they can't even want to tell a lie. So it is kind of tricky. I mean, part of the trick is just trying to reconcile samsara with figuring out what an enlightened being is going to be like. It's an exercise in futility. Futility of futilities, all is futile. So let's see here. Total freedom and awakening. I mean, one of the ways that you become enlightened, theoretically, is you no longer have any ill will. I mean, you no longer have any biases or anything like that. So even if you're able to still kill somebody as an enlightened being, you just won't want to. I mean, it wouldn't be motivated by ill will. I mean, you wouldn't do anything if you're enlightened that's clearly motivated by unenlightened mental states, like murderous rage, for example. These Dzogchen teachers, they tend to be rather unorthodox. Tibetan Buddhists, I mean, it's sort of like the game where you whisper in a certain statement into the ear of the person next to you, and then they whisper it into the person next to them, and you go down the line until you get to the end, and it's very different from what the first person was whispering. That's kind of happened to Tibetan Buddhism, also Japanese Buddhism to some degree. It's like at the end of the line, and it's mutated quite a lot from the original teachings. Although Dzogchen does still have this nucleus of really advanced wisdom to it. Seems to me, anyway. Yeah, but it says even in the old, like the early Theravada Buddhist text, that the bhikkhu leaves behind good and evil. He's not trying to cultivate good or evil, because that's still samsara. That's still karma. So you just go beyond good and evil. But that doesn't mean that you're like a Nietzschean Superman, just this ruthless exploiter of others or anything like that. I mean, you're no longer going to have an ego. You're no longer going to have selfish desires. You're no longer going to be motivated by hatred, ill will, murderous rage, anything like that. But you may be reflecting a person's own karma back at them, which may mean that you're going to cause them a certain amount of discomfort or unhappiness through your words or actions. And even the Buddha was able to do that. I mean, he'd shame people sometimes, So, yeah, I really do not think that enlightened beings are enslaved to the rules laid down upon them by certain books. But on the other hand, I really don't think that they're just going to become psychopaths, mass murderers, or anything like that. They just do not have what is required to be like some sort of murderous criminal. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. Also from Andre A. or Andrea. This is kind of a simple one. I appreciate this one. The person asks, an awakened being awakens in the illusion or from the illusion. These are quite different things. And yeah, you awaken from the illusion. The illusion just gets transcended. So, I mean, to some degree, you have the enlightened being in the illusion, but that's mainly with regard to people that are still stuck in the illusion. They're going to, within the context of their own dream, they're going to be dreaming of this enlightened being there. That's how unenlightened Buddhists see the Buddha, for example. But, yeah, I mean, they're just waking up from samsara. So that's being awakened from the illusion. At the very least, they'd appear to be like doing lucid dreaming, where they're still kind of in the illusion, but no longer like deceived by it. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Ethiopian Fake Tig, who always spells the Buddha Budddah. An Ethiopian Fake Tig says, we once talked about how the Buddha would encourage everyone to ordain and remain if it was possible. But since there are still many beings that aren't enlightened and reincarnation is real, sort of, isn't not having kids blocking the beings from being born and ever learning Dhamma? You also said one of the reasons you should respect your parents in Buddhism is cause they gave birth to you and being born as a human is a valuable thing. But if there are no longer human beings, how can there be Dhamma? Since you said monks are asked if they are human before ordination, leading me to believe non-human entities cannot be ordained. Well, non-human entities would have their own realms where there would be different ways of being spiritual. So there is that. I mean, you don't want to just completely enslave yourself to an ancient Indian cultural interpretation of how reality works and the 31 planes of existence and all that. It's very, like a Newtonian understanding of time and space, which I do not think is particularly reliable. But let's get up to the main question here. Do you think that not having kids is blocking people from being born and learning Dhamma? That's an argument that it has been used. I've come across this argument a number of times before, that by not having kids, you're blocking, there's like these beings that are like in this ghost realm because they don't have a suitable womb to be reborn into, this kind of thing. And I'm doubtful of that. This universe is infinite. So, I mean, it's not like samsara is limited to this one planet Earth. There are an infinite number of worlds out there, an infinite number of Earths even. So you just move sideways through probability, boom. So I don't think that there's any long waiting list, unless people are just kind of limited. It's like they've got these unintentionally self-imposed limitations that require them to be reborn into this version of reality or some such. Maybe then their own karma would also be that they're going to be delayed. It's their own, they're not going to be stuck in some ghost realm unless it's their karma to be stuck in a ghost realm. So, yeah, I really don't think that that is a consideration that needs to be taken too seriously, that you're like damning souls to some sort of purgatory by not having kids and allowing them to be reborn as your own children. I mean, everything happens the way it's supposed to happen. And if they can't get reborn in this world, let's say maybe this world gets blown up somehow, then they're going to move on to another one. So, yeah, and with regard to the Buddha saying that you should respect your parents, it wasn't just because being born as a human is a valuable thing. You should respect your parents because they're the ones who took care of you when you couldn't take care of yourself when you were little. They created your body and so forth in this world. And so you should have some appreciation and maybe some gratitude for that. So let's see here. Yeah, I do not think that not having kids is blocking the beings from being born and ever learning Dhamma. Because if it's their karma to be born and learn Dhamma, they'll be born and learn Dhamma. And if it's their karma to be like on some waiting list in some limbo, then that's what's going to happen. I mean, it's what happens to you is the fruition of your own karma. It's not like there's some scarcity of wombs that's fucking up the way karma works. So I'm just going to move on to Ethiopian Fake Tig's next question. He says, around Q&A 19 or so, which was some time ago, you talked about how the Buddha is equal to any other arahant, and you go on to cite Abhidhamma to back those claims. But I also remember you saying how not reading Abhidhamma is actually better, because if you know it, you would have to unknow it since it corrupts the real teachings. So can you perhaps cite another sutta and not the Abhidhamma to show how the Buddha and his other fully enlightened arahants are equal in wisdom? Well, yeah, I mean, I was just using Abhidhamma as a way of just using orthodox Buddhist doctrine itself to help me make my point that a fully enlightened Buddha is really no wiser than any arahant. Because according to Abhidhamma, wisdom is the same as amoha. Panya and amoha are synonyms. Amoha just means no delusion. So if you have zero delusion, you've maxed out on wisdom. And so a Buddha has zero delusion. Even a dry visioned arahant who doesn't even have psychic powers also has zero delusion. Wisdom is the same. So then the difference would be that the Buddha maybe is like more intelligent, which is different from wisdom. You know, he's got charisma, he's got originality, a kind of spiritual, maybe intellectual genius that then makes him more effective. But still, with regard to wisdom alone, you got zero delusion, zero delusion. So, let's see, what's the actual? Can you perhaps cite another sutta and not the Abhidhamma to show how the Buddha and his other fully enlightened arahants are equal in wisdom? Well, I mean, the Buddha himself is called an arahant. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. And there are a few suttas that refer to an enlightened being as Buddha. I mean, Buddha just means awakened. I do not think that originally the Buddha was different from any other enlightened being. He was the first one who started the tradition. But I don't think that there really is some sort of vast chasm between a Sammasambuddha and just a lowly arahant. That was just sort of cooked up later on with glorification of the founder of the religion, which happens in most religions. I mean, look what happened to Jesus of Nazareth. He got turned into God Almighty. And Mahayana Buddhists turn Buddha into some kind of capital G God also. So, yeah, I'm not exactly sure what the best sutta would be in which the Buddha is like denying that he has anything more than another fully enlightened being would have. I mean, I'm sure it's in there that, you know, it's like the goals of enlightenment were the same. I mean, it's like what you attain, what the Buddha attained, is essentially the same as what any other fully enlightened being would attain. Except maybe some fully enlightened beings wouldn't get so many psychic powers, that kind of thing. That would be like the main difference. And there are suttas, I don't recall the names of them, there are suttas where, I mean, the Buddha is saying that, I mean, this is what happens when you become enlightened, and it's not a different enlightenment for the Buddha than for any other enlightened being. So, I mean, going with tradition, the Buddha is like qualitatively better or higher than ordinary arahants simply because, you know, he has purified his paramis, the 10 paramis. You know, he perfected them, and that's not even found in the oldest texts. The whole 10 paramis and how the Buddha has to purify, has to perfect all of them before he becomes a Sammasambuddha and all that. That's just later developments with regard to devotionalism and glorification of the founder of the religion. So, yeah, I mean, there are suttas that could do the job, but I do not recall the names of them. I mean, I have come across suttas that do pretty clearly imply that you're either enlightened or you're not enlightened. I mean, the older texts are like that. I mean, the Buddha himself, it's like he's just saying, you know, I became enlightened. You can become enlightened too. If you do this, this, and this, that will increase your odds of becoming enlightened. But really, just the glorification of a Sammasambuddha into almost God, and with some Mahayana Buddhists, it really is just literally capital G God under a different name. Like a Roman emperor couldn't be called a king, but he was still an imperator. You know, it's kind of like that in Mahayana Buddhism. They're not going to call Buddha capital G God, but I mean, he's better than God. So, yeah, I mean, if you study the texts, you have some good idea of how to separate wheat from chaff or sheep from goats. You know, you read G.C. Pandey's Studies in the Origins of Buddhism, which gives some fairly good guidelines for seeing what is more likely to be an old and closer to original text and what is later to be just a later addition with, you know, all sorts of fairy tale elements and that kind of thing added. Hyper systematization, that kind of thing. But yeah, since I cannot really cite any particular sutta because I didn't really do my homework before answering this question, I think I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is also from Ethiopian Fake Tig. He said, early in the Q&As, you said you might make another video about your life in the various caves of Burma. Can you perhaps tell us what it was like to live in a cave and to sleep during the day due to the heat, as you mentioned, and how all that was bearable to you as a junior monk? Well, I mean, my father was a macho tough guy. You know, he taught us as kids how to go camping with no tent. You know, it's just, you just sleep under the open sky. He'd bring like some cheap little tarp just in case it rains. You could string up a tarp and not get rained on. You know, he had sayings like, a little pain never hurt anyone. You know, he was just this macho tough guy. And with regard to camping skills and so forth, he just instilled in me a kind of ascetic ideal before I ever became a monk. So that was one reason why it was bearable. Plus just the ideal, you know, I want to be like this heroic ascetic. You know, you read the suttas of the Sutta Nipata, where the monks were just these tough heroes. And you want to be like that. You know, it's like, that's your ideal. That's your role model. So that makes it easier too to endure these hardships because there's like this heroic theme involved. And it's just like a spiritual duty. And it's a spiritual duty that I took upon myself because I admired that. I liked that. I wanted to be like that. So that part I've answered. See, what was it like to live in a cave and to sleep during the day due to the heat? Well, I lived in several different caves. The first cave I spent one night in Thailand, which probably doesn't count. It was kind of more of a hole in the ground than a cave anyway. It kind of went down at like a 45-degree angle and then had like a turn, and then you kept going down at a 45-degree angle until you got to this flat gravel at the bottom. And it was infested with rats and mosquitoes, and there was like a whiptail scorpion on the wall that I didn't want to have anything to do with. And I didn't get much sleep that night. I still had wool robes from living in America at the time. And I was just like, I had to, the monk I was with told me, you got to cover yourself from head to toe, otherwise the rats are going to bite you, which was true. I had rats crawling on me that night, chewing on my bowl bag, chewing up my sandals. So I had these rat-chewed sandals up until I went to India and they got stolen. Why anyone would want to steal like size 13 flip-flops that are all chewed up by rats, I have no idea. So then after that, I lived in Mandalay Gu, which was just like a cube lined with like bricks and plaster. It was like concrete cube that was like 8 feet by 8 feet by 8 feet. And it was, 15 to 20 degrees Fahrenheit cooler than what was going on outside during the hot season. But still, when it's 100 degrees or like 120 degrees outside, it's still like 100 to 105 degrees inside. But still, it was better. And let's see, after that, I lived in the Thibetain. There was a cave near Thibetain Doya, the original Thibetain Doya Seattle lived in. And that was it was this huge granite boulder or block. It was bigger than just a boulder. It was like 20 feet high. Just a huge granite, just piece of rock sitting there. And there was like a notch at the bottom of it. At the entrance, it was maybe 8 feet high, and then it sloped back to 0 feet high at the back. And that was the cave. It was just like this sloping notch. And when it would rain, the rain would just kind of go down the face of the rock, and then kind of, due to the adhesive properties of water, I guess, it would go in a ways before it would drip. And so there'd be like drippy areas. You had to know which areas were dry and which weren't. And for a while, I was sharing the cave with some kind of land crab, which is pretty cool. But I only spent a few weeks there. And then the next cave I lived in was the main one I lived in, which was at Wonbo Forest Monastery, or Wonbo Wildlife Refuge Monastery, Wonbo Bemet Dojaun. And that's one place that I've lived longer than any other place, was that cave in northwestern Burma. And it was a deluxe cave, especially after I modified it. But it went in like 50 feet. It was dug into the side of a hill. And it went in like 50 feet. There were, 4 rooms, although only the end room was livable, because in the cave, you've got like this circulation of air that just kind of flows in along the floor of this long corridor, like 40-foot long corridor, where I could do walking meditation. And then it would kind of turn around and go out along the top. But the side rooms just didn't get much air circulation. They were really stuffy, and they were mainly just used for storage. But the main room at the end was like the altar room. There's a big altar there. And I did most of my living there. And still, it was fairly hot. All year round, it averaged out to like 84 degrees Fahrenheit, summer and winter, day and night. That was sort of like the average temperature always at that place. The well water also was about 84 degrees Fahrenheit, just because, you average out day and night, summer and winter, and 84 degrees Fahrenheit was just like the mean temperature. And so you get deep enough into the ground or deep down enough in the well, and it just averages out to 84 degrees all the time. But still, in the hot weather, it could get really stuffy, especially right at the time of day, like in the evening, when the outside temperature was also 84, and so the air circulation almost stopped. When there's a temperature differentiation, a differential outside, it would cause like an air circulation cell inside the cave. But when you get to the point where the temperature inside and outside were the same, the air circulation would almost stop, and it would get really stuffy and uncomfortable. Well, a lot of the time in the really hot weather, I'd just be sleeping naked spread eagle on a concrete floor with like a piece of wood for a pillow. And it wasn't because I was trying to be ascetic or austere. It was just that was the most comfortable way to sleep, is just flat on your back on a concrete floor with a piece of wood for a pillow. And then even then sometimes the concrete would start heating up. I'd start sweating. Next thing I knew, I'm lying in a puddle of my own sweat. I just had to get up and move to a fresh, cool spot on the cement floor. And the piece of wood, I mean, it just didn't soak up sweat as badly as a cloth pillow would. Cloth pillow would be like a gym sock within a couple days. And then I also spent some time, let's see, there was another cave down below after old Unandia died. He was bitten by a cobra and died. I had to keep an eye on the lower monastery, mainly to keep wise guy teenagers from hunting the semi-wild red jungle fowl or wild chickens around the monastery. So I moved down to a lower cave to keep an eye on that until I wound up getting really sick and had to spend the rains retreat in Rangoon. And then there was one shot Oatmin at the northern boundary of Alando Casbah National Park. I spent about 3 years in that cave. I guess it would be called a cave. Really, it was just this huge overhanging rock ledge. It was about 30 or 40 feet high. It went in about 30 or 40 feet, and then it was like 90 or 100 feet wide. So it was just sort of like this crescent-shaped cave. And just kind of an overhanging rock ledge. There was a waterfall that would come over the top of it during the rainy season, and just the spray over the centuries caused like the inner parts to collapse and just made like this hollow place underneath the waterfall. That's where I lived for about 3 years. And that, I mean, they all had their good points and their bad points. One of the bad points of that overhanging rock ledge was during the hot season, it would just fill up with various species of wasps. You know, there was just tens of thousands of these really stingy kind of reddish orange paper wasps all along the back wall. That was a challenge. Also, that overhanging rock ledge was supposedly haunted by some sort of like terrestrial deity that a lot of people were afraid of. They wouldn't come near that cave, but that particular deity didn't bother me at all. The mosquitoes bothered me. The horseflies bothered me. But and the temperature bothered me sometimes. But the Osa sound of the terrestrial deity didn't bother me. But I mean, sleeping during the day, sometimes it'd be so hot that you just couldn't sleep. But sleeping during the day it didn't make sense. It was when it's so hot that you really can't do anything else. It's best just to lie there motionless and do your meditation and other activities at night. You know, you get up early in the morning, go for alms round, try to leave early enough so that you're back before the sun gets high enough that you're drenched in sweat. And then you eat your meal and you do the water things, you know, wash your bowl, brush your teeth, that kind of thing. And it depends on the weather, you know, when you're going to take a shower. And it also depends on whether you have like a bathhouse to bathe in. Because if you have to wear your lower robe when you take a shower or take a bath, then you got to take a bath earlier in the day. And then you just get covered with sweat by the end of the day. But if you have a bathhouse or some other way of taking a bath naked, then you can just go in there and take the bath in the evening to wipe off, to rinse off the day's accumulation of sweat and grease. Well, let's see here. Did I answer enough of this question? Can you perhaps tell us what it was like to live in a cave and to sleep during the day? Yeah, I mean, I think I've done a fair amount of explaining. You know, I've never really been a sociable sort of person, so solitude has always been easy. Throughout most of my life, aside from the company of a beautiful woman, I've tended to prefer solitude. And I'm still pretty much that way. I'm just not really a particularly sociable person. It's not like I'm autistic and just completely like inept in social settings. I can function in social settings fine. It's just that as a general rule, I prefer just being alone or with a beautiful woman that loves me, that kind of thing. So let's see, that had nothing to do with the question though, apparently, or just the living in solitude part. Yeah, I mean, just do it yourself and see what it's like. You know what I'm saying? I think there's probably lots of caves in Ethiopia. I assume that there were a lot of sort of desert father type, early Christian monks type people that lived in caves in Ethiopia. You might be able to find one of those places. Make ropes or baskets to earn a living. But I think I'm going to move on to the next question here. And the next question is from Cole. And Cole says, why is listening to or playing music so strongly discouraged and even forbidden for monks in Theravada Buddhism? Yeah, I mentioned earlier on that there's a list of 10 things that monks aren't even allowed to touch, and one of them is musical instruments. You're not even allowed to pick up a guitar, much less play it. So why is listening to or playing music so strongly discouraged for monks in Theravada Buddhism? Mainly because it's wallowing in sensuality. You got to bear in mind that Theravada Buddhism, or Buddhism itself, arose in like the Ganges Valley of like Iron Age India, 5th century BCE. And there was already a cultural tradition well established by the time of the Buddha's existence there, where it was just like this, like an etiquette for ascetics. And one of the main things is you do not wallow in sensuality. You do not have sexual behavior. You don't listen to music. You don't try to make your food taste better. It's just anything that smacks of wallowing in sensuality, just any kind of luxury, is forbidden. Partly because of the ancient Indian culture in which Buddhism arose. That was already well established, probably had been established since prehistoric times in like the Indus Valley civilization. So playing music is just an unnecessary indulgence in sensuality that helps to keep you anchored in samsara. Going with the ancient Indian interpretation of these things. So that would be the main reason. And that's a good reason why Buddhism doesn't have very good music. Theravada Buddhist music tends not to be all that great. And I'm just going to move on to Cole's next question. He says, can music be enjoyed without causing craving or clinging? Well, I mean, depends on how subtle you want to go, I suppose. But really enjoying music would already be kind of wallowing in sensuality. So, I mean, to what extent can you wallow in sensuality without causing craving or clinging? It's Buddhist ethics occur. I mean, they deal with extreme subtleties. So what like your average normie would consider hate, for example, is, I mean, that's just like a really crude, obvious example of hate from a Buddhist point of view, because even just the slightest like aversion would be considered hate from the Buddhist point of view, or just the slightest attraction is still lobha or greed. It's just, it can be microscopic, from a psychological point of view. It can just be the tiniest subconscious little bit of like attraction or aversion, and already you've got lobha or dosa. So can music be enjoyed without causing craving or clinging? In all likelihood, to the extent that you're enjoying it, to that same extent, you're causing at least microscopic little additions to your store of craving or clinging. I mean, it's kind of hard to enjoy something without at least clinging to it while it's happening. That's part of the enjoyment, I guess. So you can listen to music without causing craving or clinging. By just in the herd, there is only the herd. You're not stringing together the melodies or appreciating any of the lyrics or any of that. You're just in the herd, there's only this auditory stimuli going on. But that's not really enjoying the music. It's kind of like deconstructing it so that you're not enjoying it. So, I mean, I won't just flat out insist that it's impossible to enjoy music without causing craving or clinging, but it just seems almost by definition that to the extent that you are enjoying it, to that same extent you are wallowing in sensuality. You're indulging in sensual pleasure, like householders who enjoy pleasures of the senses, which, especially for a bhikkhu, is kind of a no-no. But, for a layperson, you don't have to go so microscopic with the ethics. It's not against the rules, not against the 5 precepts for a layperson to listen to music and enjoy it and be into it, maybe even tap his foot or hum along. Take 8 precepts, you shouldn't even do that. Because unnecessary wallowing in sensuality, indulgence in sensual pleasures should be kept to an absolute minimum. Listening to music is nowhere near to a necessity, except for maybe a few really musically oriented people out there. So, it's relatively straightforward from an ancient Indian spiritual point of view. It might seem kind of alien to, a modern Westerner who's been living in good times because of the strong men that lived before them. And so I'm just going to move on to the next question, which is the last question. In fact, somebody asked this question just shortly before I started recording this video. And this is from Otto, who doesn't ask a whole lot of questions. He says, Doggy Dhamma, can animals benefit from listening to Dhamma talks? I used to play them for my cat. And, I have told the story of the frog god. You got this frog who just happens to be within earshot of the Buddha when the Buddha is delivering a discourse. And the frog doesn't understand what the Buddha's saying, but just the vibe of the higher consciousness and the soothing tones of the Buddha's voice cause the frog to just kind of be in this expanded mental state. It's just sitting there rapt, R-A-P-T, just hearing the Buddha's voice and just sort of being uplifted by the higher consciousness around him. When a shepherd just kind of walks up and not even seeing the frog, sets his crook down, his shepherd's crook, and squishes the frog's head and kills it instantly. He didn't do it on purpose. He didn't even look down to see the frog down there. But because the frog died in this exalted, relatively for a frog, exalted state of consciousness, it wound up going to heaven. I think it went to Tawatimsa heaven and became the frog god. So even going with Orthodox Theravada Buddhism, some animals at least can benefit from listening to Dhamma talks. Then you've got the elephant mentioned by somebody else earlier on in a Jataka tale, who was harmed by hearing thieves talking violently, poisoning the poor elephant's mind because somehow the elephant understood what they were talking about. Either that or he just got sort of the opposite of the uplift. He got dragged downwards, this elephant did, just from the lowered consciousness of these thieves, even though it's hard to believe that a thief would be at a lower level of consciousness than an elephant, but who knows? So I think animals can benefit from listening to Dhamma talks, although almost certainly they're not going to understand what's being said. So the main benefit they would get would be from just sort of the atmosphere of raised consciousness in their environment, because there is a kind of empathic or telepathic connection between conscious beings, whether you're consciously aware of it or not. So if this animal is just listening to a recording with no actual living people around with consciousness that could be uplifted by it, they might not receive any benefit at all. But if the animal is in the presence of the wise teacher who is delivering the Dhamma talk, or at least even if it's on YouTube or something, the dog or the cat or whatever animal it is in the presence of people who are being uplifted by what they're hearing, then the animal, even though it can't understand what is being said in the Dhamma talk, it's just going to pick up on the uplift in consciousness around it just through osmosis, psychic osmosis, and that could uplift the animal. And that's apparently what happened with the frog. And so, I would say that animals can benefit from listening to Dhamma talks, although it's not the Dhamma talk itself that is benefiting them. It's just the raised consciousness of the beings around them who can understand the Dhamma talk, or just the raised consciousness itself is benefiting them because they are partaking of that, because of this empathic connection that all conscious beings have. At least that's my take on it. And that's it. I've answered all the questions, as far as I can tell, unless I forgot one. So, like I should always say at the beginning, and pretty much never do, if you have any questions you think maybe I can answer, especially with regard to Buddhism, early Buddhism, Theravada, Dhamma, Dharma, philosophy, that kind of stuff, or just what it's like living in Burma, that kind of stuff too, then yeah, feel free to ask. And no more than 3 questions per person per episode. Please like and subscribe if you have not done so already. Look at the URL links below the video and see how that you can link to stuff, including the advertisements for my books on Amazon. And aside from that, just be happy and stuff. Know what I'm saying?